And good afternoon, World Civ guys. Um, I do want to inform you guys of something coming up, and that is this. Um, your final exam. Your final exam in this class is going to consist of both World War II and the Cold War, the period immediately following World War II of conflict, rivalry, but not actual hostility, not actual shooting warfare between the United States and the Soviet Union. And I am been put in charge in making that test. And I can tell you right now, it's going to be a 100 item test that'll include matching, multiple choice, and true and false questions that will be on Canvas. And in here, um, your exam in here is the last thing you take. The last day of school. So we have a lot of time to get there, but I want to make sure that we do. You'll pardon me, sorry. It's early in the morning and my allergies are running rampant. I mean, I actually like studies of the 20th century because, as you notice, we start seeing a lot of film because there's been a lot of film produced in the 20th century as well as a lot of the 20th century was captured on film. So it's kind of cool. But let's get back to the war. As it says here, yeah, World War II was the spring of 1942. The Axis were winning on every front. In Europe, North Africa, Russia, the Soviet Union, and also in the Pacific. I mean, the Axis were advancing, and it really looked like that the world was about to change in a big way. And so, yes, let's begin, shall we? Right there. So, of course, one of the most glaring horrors of what was a horrible war already was the Holocaust. And I do promise that I will stop and I will show you my pictures of Auschwitz. I visited, in 1989, I visited Dachau, which was a prototype. You say, what's a prototype? Prototype is like a model. Dachau was built in Germany outside of Munich as a model for what other bigger concentration camps were going to be. Dachau actually was a small camp. It only held a maximum capacity of 30,000 individuals at a time. Of course, you know that when individuals came to the camp, their average lifespan was 6 to 9 months at best. Average. And what you might not know is that these concentration camps, there were two kinds of concentration camps. One were work camps, and the other, of course, were death camps. Both, though, ended in the death of the victims. In the work camps, you basically they starved you to death. They worked you, and then simply did not feed you enough to sustain you. Average of 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day, which is not as much as I'll guarantee you eat right now, particularly if you're an athlete. And then they would work them 11, 12, 13-hour days. And, the body just can't sustain that over a prolonged period of time. The other camps, like Auschwitz number 2, which I visited, were death camps. Camps where people were brought in trains. They had barracks for the people where they just um, waited their turn to go into the gas chamber and then, of course, be executed in the gas chamber and then be shipped out to the crematorium where their bodies would be turned to ash, and that ash would be shipped back to Germany and used as soap. Yeah, that was the horribly interesting thing about all of it. These Jews and other people, gypsies, homosexuals, um, people with physical and mental challenges would end up in the concentration camps, and everything they had, including their bodies, would be totally recycled. When I say everything they had, that meant, like, for example, I'm going to show you pictures of artificial limbs. They were recycled, sent back to Germany for use by other people because prosthetics were expensive, but also things like the gold in their teeth and their hair. Their hair would be shaved off and used for stuffing mattresses and pillows. Um, and finally, of course, they would be turned to ash, burnt by burning them, and that would be used, that would be made into soap. And so, all right, so back to the matter at hand. Oh, yeah. So I visited Dachau and I also visited Auschwitz. I actually, and by the way, both these places are not the kind of places where you take selfies. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's just not, no, no, no. I actually visited Dachau twice. I never intended to go to Dachau twice, but the second time I was in Poland, I was with some guys and they wanted to go to Dachau, and I was like, you know, because it's not a fun place to visit. I mean, it's informative. I'm very glad I went there, but I will be very happy if I never go back again. But everybody needs to go. And yes, I visited the Jewish History Museum in Warsaw, Poland. Yeah, I was in Poland both in 2016 and then again in 2018. I like Poland. Poland, if you ever get a chance to go, Poland is a country that has modernized itself. It's a country that likes Americans. It's a country that if you're speaking to somebody who is under 40, they speak English very well. And finally, another cool thing about Poland, it's cheap. Oh yeah, I mean much cheaper than the rest of Europe. But anyway, so getting back to this. The Holocaust, the attempt by the Nazi government to eliminate Jews as a race in Europe, but not just Jews. Like I was talking about earlier, other people. The gypsies were a big target. Uh, gypsies, they called gypsies, the technical name for the gypsies, and there are gypsies in the United States and other parts of the world as well. The name gypsy comes from that people thought they came from Egypt. But technically they're called the Roma, Roma. Anyway, gypsies, people with physical and mental challenges, like for example, children with Down syndrome would be taken. Things that and loudmouth Catholics who wouldn't shut up about the fact that you're killing people and this is wrong. But anyway, let's go back to this. Oddly enough, the idea for this, meaning the Holocaust, came from scientific thinking of the 18th and 19th century, something called social Darwinism. Darwin once said that nature selects certain species to survive, other species to thrive, and finally other species for extinction. Well, if you apply that to mankind, um, the belief is that nature selects certain races for extinction, and certain races, in the case of the German belief, the Aryan race, to dominate. That's why they wanted Lebensraum. That's why they wanted to expand into Poland and into the Ukraine. And other races like the Jews and like the Gypsies needed to be eliminated, and Slavs. So, also make note of the fact that even though 6 million Jews died horrible deaths in this tragedy, once again, they were not the only groups targeted. Who were the other groups? Just went over them. Total death tally concentration camps, I've seen everything from 8 million to 16 million. And, I don't know. They didn't, the Nazis kept records, actually very thorough records. When I was in Auschwitz, there were walls and walls, and they would have these people, the victims' pictures, and have their full dossier. They would have, who they were, what their age was, where they're from, and just before they killed them. Interesting. Oh, yeah. Kristallnacht. Now, before World War II, when the Nazi movement was growing in Europe, one night, the Nazis, and the brown shirts decided, hey, let's just go wild. Let's just go wild on everything Jewish. Kristallnacht literally means the night of broken glass. They smashed every Jewish business, every Jewish synagogue they could get their hands on. Beat Jews. There were some Jews who died in Kristallnacht. Many Jews then, during the 30s, left Germany. I should write that. And made their way to other countries. Albert Einstein actually was able to come to the United States and teach at Princeton, and they were glad to have him. Of course, the Nazis said he's a Jew, and anything he comes up with is going to be flawed, even if it was the theory of relativity. So, unfortunately, though, for some, when they moved out of Germany and into like France or other countries, when Germany took over those countries, they fell right back into German hands. The final solution, as it was called, was concocted by Adolf Hitler and the so-called Death's Head Battalion, the SS, which we saw that film about, which was commanded by Heinrich Himmler at a place called the Wannsee Conference in a suburb of Berlin in 1941. You say, what does all that mean, Mr. Horton? I mean, to me, this one part here is the most frightening thing about the Holocaust, and that was this. Here you have these guys, Heinrich Himmler and a bunch of Nazi leaders, sitting down one day in a suburb of Berlin and drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and calmly and also scientifically and logically discussing how to make the world a better place. I mean, they were trying to make the world a better place. How do we do it? Oh, we kill Jews and gypsies and people with Down syndrome and homosexuals, communists, Slavs, etc., etc., etc. And then that following Sunday, I'll guarantee you a lot of them went to church. They were looked upon as good people. And they really honestly thought they were doing the world a favor. Anyway, so in the spring of 1942, the Axis armies were victorious in every facet of the war. And by the way, right here, Mr. Horton, here's a reminder. I want you to show the class your Auschwitz photos. Okay, I'll do that. So I will stop this film and we'll go look at Auschwitz photos. In the spring of 1942, Axis armies were victorious in every facet of the war in every corner of the globe. The Germans were pushing on the gates of Moscow, the capital of Russia, which had they taken Moscow, that would have been critical because Moscow was the railroad hub, the railroad center of all of the Soviet Union. Had they taken Moscow, any train then, I mean, the country would have been paralyzed. To the north, they were trying to take Leningrad, St. Petersburg, which was surrounded, starving, and cut off. Now, I do want to show you something. And in Stalingrad's oil and wheat fields were about to fall into German hands, and the Germans did take Stalingrad. They regretted taking it, but they took it. And Rommel's Afrika Korps were propping up the failed Italian campaign in North Africa. When I say, one thing you need to note here is that even though Germany and Italy were allies, Germany will wish about halfway through the war they never met these guys because they were constantly having to bail them out. The Italian soldier was the worst soldier of the war. That's so humiliating. The Italian soldier was the worst soldier of the war. He surrendered in droves. He was not loyal. But yeah. Anyway. And so, yeah. The Japanese were in control of 1/3 of China and were pushing towards the British-held Burma and India. And there were no real threat from either the American or British navies in the Pacific in the spring of 1942. All right. Now, the Germans had known for quite some time of the likelihood of an American entry into the war, but were largely unconcerned. One German expert even boasting, one should write there. even boasting that the United States would win the war by bombing Germany with refrigerators and toasters. In fact, and they had some reason to feel like this. The B-17, the standard bomber of the American 8th Army Air Corps, even the guys who flew in the B-17 called them flying coffins. I mean, as slow as they were just, they were easy pickings for anti-aircraft fire, easy pickings for the German Luftwaffe, the fighters. But the thing that was, there were so many of them. The Americans produced so many of them that the Germans could knock them all out of the sky. Sherman candles, forgive me, Sherman candles, uh, Sherman candles were what the German tank commanders called the M4, the standard United States Army tank, the Sherman tank. Germans called them Sherman candles because, you ever hit them, they'd go up like a candle because they were powered by gasoline. Gasoline, as you know, not only is combustible, it is an accelerant. The German tanks were powered by diesel, which, yes, burns, but not like gasoline. So, over the course of the next 2 years, millions of American soldiers were trained and shipped out to Great Britain, where they trained some more in anticipation of one day going back and assaulting what was called Fortress Europe. The big three of this war. This, for example, will be a question on your final exam. Who were they? There was Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. There was Winston Churchill of Great Britain, the Prime Minister, and there was Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States. Churchill and Roosevelt agreed that the new influx of American soldiers should be directed towards vanquishing the Nazi presence in North Africa. This was called Operation Torch, liberating North Africa from the Nazis. That angered Joseph Stalin because he thought that the British and Americans were dragging their feet. I mean, you have to remember that the Soviet Union, and this will be on your test as well, the Soviet Union suffered more than anybody else in World War II. That's one thing that can't be denied. Here's your ratio. The Soviet Union lost 1 out of every 7 human beings in their country. Not 1 out of every 7 soldiers, which would be terrible, because you're looking at 14%. Those are terrible losses for an army. But they lost 1 out of 7, everybody, soldiers, people, civilians, they called it the Great Patriotic War. And Joseph Stalin thought that the Americans and the British were dragging their feet, hoping that the Germans would weaken them so that after the war, the British and Americans could turn on them. And you might think that would be ridiculous, but stranger things have happened. And remember that Soviet Union and Russia, whatever you want to call it, had been invaded, and this was the 4th time they'd been invaded in the last 200 years. Yeah, and all from Europe, from the West. So, Stalin, like other Soviet Russian leaders before and since, did not trust his own allies and thought they were allowing the Soviet Union to suffer unnecessarily so that his country would be in a weakened state after the war. The Soviets were indeed suffering greatly, as, for example, Leningrad was cut off, surrounded for 1,000 days. I read a book when I was a kid called The 1,000 Days, and it was about the siege of Leningrad. And as it says, and we're down to 500 calories per day for workers. 500 calories a day. How much is that? A Big Mac is 540 calories. Yeah, 500 calories a day is not much, especially if you're working. And yes, there were reports of cannibalism inside the city of Leningrad. The horses disappeared first, then the dogs, then the rats, and yeah, cannibalism. In a stroke of genius and desperation, however, Stalin had all factories of war machinery dismantled, placed on trains, and reconstructed east of the Ural Mountains and out of German bomber range. He also applied the same strategy that Tsar Alexander I had applied to Napoleon 100 years earlier, which was to scorch the earth. In other words, as the Germans marched through the Soviet Union, They marched through towns that had been burned to the ground. They marched through wheat fields that had been either burned, water holes poisoned, cattle either removed or slaughtered. The Russians left nothing for them. Stalingrad had become a trap within a trap, as Hitler insisted on taking the city at all costs and insisted upon preserving it for the same price. This phrase here, Nishagu Nazad. Let's look at a picture, shall you? That I'll find in 1 second. And here it is. This is a Russian commemorative stamp of the era. And that right there means Nishagu Nazad. Literally translated, not a step back. Here you see a Soviet soldier laying on top of, using his dead horse as a fortress. He has a machine gun there. He has a grenade. He has a grenade. He has a grenade, of course, ready to throw it. It was an order. And you guys remember, you guys saw that film we watched. That film, the Enemy at the Gates, where the Russian soldiers advanced on German positions, got cut to pieces, they retreated, and as they retreated, they were cut down by other Soviet soldiers. Nishagu Nazad, not a step back. Yes. The entire German Sixth Army was lost at Stalingrad, 500,000 soldiers, and only 90,000 of those were taken away. In other words, 90,000 surrendered. 500,000 went into Stalingrad, 90,000 surrendered. Without a doubt, the most desperate fighting took place along this frigid eastern front. The Russians had drawn the German supply line excruciatingly long, thin, and unreliable. While the German offensive had pushed to the very gates of Moscow, Hitler stubbornly persisted that Stalingrad should be the main objective. And as you see there, most German machinery was diesel fuel. In cold weather, diesel fuel turns to jelly. And that was a problem. But the maelstrom, the worst fighting, took place in Stalingrad. Yes, not only that, as the Germans advanced into the Ukraine, which is where you find Stalingrad, they were actually welcomed. They were welcomed. In fact, they went into many villages and they would have big giant signs saying Willkommen Freunden, welcome friends. And so in the Ukraine, which by the way, Ukraine at the time was part of the Soviet Union, lots of Ukrainians signed up for and helped the Germans. Although, here's the thing, Adolf Hitler was such a racist that he wouldn't use these guys. He didn't use 800,000 Ukrainians volunteered to fight for the Germans. And Hitler wouldn't use them. In fact, he used them for very mundane details such as helping guard concentration camps. Which was like derelict duty. Winston Churchill actually wanted to see the Allied invasion attack what he called the soft underbelly of Europe, meaning that Churchill wanted to attack Europe through what is, I'll show you. Map. I had a map. Sorry. Map. Yes, here's your map of Europe. Now, of course, all the American and British soldiers were here. North Africa's down here. Soviet Union is here. Stalin said that his idea was He wanted the Allies to make their first landing in Europe by going up the Balkan Peninsula. Going up the Balkan Peninsula through here to attack Germany. Now, the problem with that is quite obvious, and that obvious is this territory here, it is very, 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 I could say very 1,000 times and not be accurate enough, mountainous, rough, hilly terrain. It's very difficult for an army to advance and very easy for an army, the Germans, to defend. But Churchill knew what he was thinking. He wanted the American and British thrust to come through here and thereby block the Soviets from gaining too much territory. Because Churchill knew what was going to happen if the Soviets ever came here. And what would happen was they wouldn't leave. And it wouldn't have been solved. Stalin saw that as a dodge to bailing him out. Actually, Winston Churchill saw a vision of a post-World War that was already concerning him even before the war was close to ending. And that vision was that the Soviet Union would own half of Europe. President Roosevelt, a man whose physical ailments worsened, he was getting sicker and sicker. Remember, President Roosevelt had polio. That's why when you see pictures of Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill, they're not standing, they're sitting, because Roosevelt couldn't stand. He had polio. He was confined to a wheelchair for the entire time he was in the presidency. Although the great majority, by that I mean like 99.99% of the Americans, didn't know that he had polio. Yeah, and he was crippled. They kept it a secret. So Roosevelt, he got sicker as the war continued, and was only concerned with the immediate threat of Germany and Japan posed to the free world. And so Churchill's plan to invade Europe got overruled. All right, we're going to pick up with Operation Torch, the liberation of North Africa, tomorrow. And thank you all very much.